A man sees corruption in his community and examines his own failed life as well as the morality around him. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a book that I read, one from a familiar author on this channel. I've talked about a number of their books, and I'm just a big fan of them in general. And today's story is all about the corrupting influence of money and an examined failed life and all of that. I am referring to Winter of Our Discontent by John Steinbeck, which was published in 1961. I've talked about John Steinbeck on this channel before, so I don't need to go into that great of detail. But for those who don't know, Steinbeck was an American writer who lived throughout the late 1800s to the mid or so 1900s. Probably around 1970, 1980 is when he died. And he was known for writing books, short stories, things like that. He was writing sort of I want to say socialist literature, although it's mostly just about people, the common people standing up against the powerful, which you see in The Grapes of Wrath, Of Mice and Men, in Dubious Battle, which is probably one of Steinbeck's best. But I think Steinbeck's best story, in my opinion, is East of Eden, which is a grand epic in California, telling the story of multiple generations of the Trask family and the hardships that they have to endure with the land, but also with one another. It's a very good book. And Steinbeck was known for being a bit of a political figure, but as he grew older, he maybe dropped some of that, and he became more in line with what many people in America felt, especially during the 1960s. You see some of that reflected in this story, and I'll talk more about that later, but he was a very fascinating writer, and I always love talking about him. So without further ado, let's talk about Winter of Our Discontent. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So Winter of Our Discontent focuses on Ethan Hawley. He is an East Coast family man. His family comes from generations of very wealthy people, and his ancestors were even pirates. He says he's related to Ethan Allen in some sort of way, who was big during the American Revolution, kind of living in the New York area. And he has two children and a loving wife. But at the beginning of the story, we find out that he is recovering from financial difficulties. His father kind of spent all the family money on failed endeavors, and there was a big fire that affected the community, and then he started his own business, but that failed, and so now he's working as a store clerk for an Italian grocery businessman, which he doesn't really like, possibly for some racist beliefs, because he doesn't want to be working under an Italian. He uses several slurs, especially to that man's face, which is kind of weird. But he's aspiring to sort of fix things for himself, and he sees some corruption in his community, and he wants to take advantage of that in some way. One of the local members of the community, a woman named Margie, who is a widow but also a sort of a man-eater, tries to get involved in Ethan's life, but he doesn't seem to be having it. And she reads tarot cards for Ethan's wife, possibly to get closer to him and light a fire under him to get him to do more, but also because she's friends with Ethan's wife, Mary, and the tarot cards reveal that great fortune is coming to Ethan soon, which his wife Mary believes, but Ethan isn't really sure that's actually going to happen. Nevertheless, he schemes with a banker. The banker tells him to invest, and also the banker questions whether Mr. Marullo is a legal citizen in this country, and how it would be easy to just sort of take away the grocery store from him by getting him deported. Ethan also comes across a fellow soldier in this story, a member of the community named Danny Taylor, who has some money but is slowly spending it all because he is an alcoholic, spending a lot of money, and many people believe that he's going to die of this alcoholism in the community. Ethan has some money from his wife, who got money from her dead brother, and Ethan wants to give $1,000 to Danny so he can go get a cure for his alcoholism, go get treatment. Danny tells him that he's good at lying and that he's just going to end up spending that money on alcohol and die. But Ethan assures him that he wants to see Danny cured, and Danny ends up taking the money and goes missing for a period of time. And then Ethan tries to instill good values in his children, but it seems his children just want to be rich and wealthy like some of their neighbors, and it sort of makes Ethan demoralized, and he tries to figure out how he's going to get his kids on the straight and narrow. In addition to all of that, his children, especially his son Alan, is writing a paper for Why America is Great as part of a contest. And this continues for some time. And then the story flashes forward. It starts in Easter, but it flashes forward to July of that year. And things have sort of changed. Ethan is still scheming about Mr. Marullo, but they're becoming closer together, sort of friends. And Marullo loans him his car when Ethan needs it, and he even decides to go on a trip to New York. While all of that is happening, Ethan plans a bank robbery of a local bank, and is hoping to get some money and thinks he won't be caught in the process. Ethan, before he can go, a person stops by the grocery store, and he stops himself short of actually engaging in that robbery. And then later, Ethan finds out that Marullo has been deported, but before he was deported, he left Ethan the store. Because he trusted Ethan, which we find out Ethan was the one who got him deported in the first place by leaving a tip with the immigration office. And then we find out from one of the bankers that Danny has died, that the money that Ethan gave him kill him, and he leaves his estate to Alan. We learned this through one of the bankers who was scheming with Ethan this entire time, and we find out that this has been Ethan's master plan, to get Marullo deported, to borrow money from the bank, in an effort to make it seem like he's buying it when in reality he was given it, and then use that money for the grocery store. And then because he has Danny's estate, the community wants to build an airport or something like that, they now have to go through Ethan. So it seems he's on the up and up now. At this point, Ethan also learns that his son is famous because he was a runner-up in the Why America is Best contest. And everyone is celebrating. He's getting offers to go on various TV shows, but a representative from the contest shows up and says that Alan pretty much plagiarized his entire essay, and they want the family to go away quietly so that nobody gets hurt. It turns out Alan was listening to this, and Ethan confronts him about it, and Alan says that, everyone does it, everyone lies, everyone cheats, I don't feel bad about it, and anyone else would do the same. And Ethan realizes at that point that this is the exact argument that he's been going about this entire story, justifying his actions, that it's going to enrich him, and he can always go to his morally righteous self later. And he's realizing his kids are doing the same, and so he questions everything there. And at this point, Ethan decides to go and kill himself down at the pier, where the family is. And as he tries to go, his daughter tries to stop him because Ethan suspects she knows what he's going to do. And he has razor blades with him, but she replaces it with a sort of talisman. And as the story comes to a close, he's deciding whether or not he's going to let the tide sort of drown him at this point, or if he's going to return the talisman to his daughter. it's a bit ambiguous there. In terms of analysis, there is quite a bit worth talking about with Winter of Our Discontent. It's a very fascinating story, which seems a little bit different from the stories that I've read from Steinbeck previously. Certainly a little bit more bitter than the other ones, I feel, in terms of maybe examining the American dream and how maybe in the 30s it looked like it was possible, especially if we shifted to another culture. But by the 60s, when the story was written, we hadn't shifted to that culture. Steinbeck feels a little bitter here. It feels like a reflection of everything that came before. One of the main themes that Steinbeck is writing about here is that of the failed life. Ethan rues the unfortunate failings that have led him to this point in his life. He aspired for great things. He was promised wealth from his family members. He even ran a business in the past, but all of those have sort of failed. He wasn't given any of that wealth, and his business failed because of his inexperience and whatnot. And so he's sort of had nothing, although you would argue from the outside that he has a beautiful family, things are going well for him. He doesn't really have nothing, but he feels that he has nothing. And ultimately, he feels this is all a sort of gradual failing, rather than anything sudden, a death by erosion. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. Men don't get knocked out, or they can fight back against big things. What kills them is erosion. They get nudged into failure. They get slowly scared. I'm scared. And that's Ethan talking about his sort of life, noting that if something big happens to you, you could probably fight it, or you could recover from it. But if it's a series of failings, if it's a series of bad things happening for you, maybe you can't fight against that. Maybe it's just, death by 1,000 cuts, as they say, or death by erosion, as Ethan says here. There is a question whether all of this is sort of Ethan's fault. Many people in the community are noting that he has potential and he could have done anything by now, but he's just stayed in his position as a grocery clerk, which is possibly necessary because he has kids and he's just trying to find that steady income. But the banker is like, you need to invest your money, and other people are like, you could totally start something new for yourself. So the townspeople believe that this is all Ethan's fault, that he's sort of relegated himself to a sort of behind the scenes or kind of passive position in his own life. But again, there's also a lot of corruption in the community. So if Ethan sticks his neck out, he might not get what he needs because everyone might kind of align against him to protect their own business interest. But what is clear is that this has all made Ethan bitter, and he even despises his children because they want that wealth that he was not really able to achieve, and it seems like that's all they're really focused on. And his wife loves him, but he feels like his wife wants some of that money too, to have that better life and to be able to relate to their neighbors a little bit more. And that ultimately pushes Ethan to a point where he's willing to do anything. He considers robbing a bank in this story. He schemes to get money from one of his so-called friends by basically pushing him to drink himself to death. And then he also basically deports his boss in an effort to nab the grocery store. And it's a pretty sort of sinister kind of thing there. I like this exploration of the failed life that Steinbeck does and what it pushes someone to do, and then also is sort of a reflection of the failed American dream, where at one point anything was possible, but for Ethan it doesn't really seem that way. And look at what he does to or has to do to try to make that even possible in the first place. The other thing that John Steinbeck is talking about is money, sort of the main course of this story, I would say. Ethan, his family, and his city are obsessed with money. His children in particular, it's all they can talk about. His wife, it doesn't really say that, but Ethan can tell that she's thinking it. Ethan constantly thinks about getting more money, and he's also kind of upset that he's thinking about that because it's sort of a moral failing. He should want other things, but he keeps coming back to money. And the community seems obsessed with money to the point where they're engaging in corruption, scheming, and climbing over one another in order to get what they want. And so any community that kind of exists in that mindset, it's not a healthy community, I would say. And Ethan wishes for the family's former wealth, as do the kids. Like it's constantly on their mind, and Ethan thinks it's not healthy for them to be thinking that way. Allow me to read you another interesting quote from this. Ellen only last night asked, "Daddy, when will we be rich?" But I did not say to her what I know. We will be rich soon, and you who handle poverty badly will handle riches equally badly. And that is true. In poverty she is envious. In riches she may be a snob. Money does not change the sickness, only the symptoms, which is a pretty rad quote, but pretty sad when Ethan is thinking and saying this about his daughter. He doesn't seem to have the best opinion of his kids, because they're focused on that money. And he's like, if in poverty you're envious of other people, but when you have money, you're not gonna be very healthy either. You're gonna want more. You're gonna look down on people. Possibly it's gonna make you a bad person. And the city officials scheme to get more money, and we see a lot of corruption, and ultimately they're punished because a grand jury trial commences at the end of the story. What I think Steinbeck is trying to get at here is he's trying to address the moral decay that he's seeing in society. Most of his stories came in the 30s and 40s, but this one was written in the 1960s. And he's looking around and he's seeing quite a bit of failings in society. The corruption that is slowly beginning to take hold, the massive amount of protests that are taking place, the government failings that he's seeing all around him. You could equate this to just like an old man just saying, this younger generation, isn't doing too well. But there's quite a bit of these moral failings in the 1960s, especially in regards to like Vietnam and the impending drug crisis, which the CIA was largely responsible for. But that's probably not what Steinbeck is talking about here. It's hard not to look at like Nixon, who would come years later, and Reagan, who become president 20 years from that point, and say, yeah, like he's absolutely right. We became so focused on money that our society just fell by the wayside, and we gave control to these business interests that did not have our community's best interest in heart. I kind of see where Steinbeck is going here, especially after the promise of the 1930s and 40s, where it was going to be a country that focused on its people after the Great Depression, and that never really came true. That was sort of dropped off, possibly because again we gave control back to the weapons manufacturers and all sorts of things like that. Ethan sees himself as sort of exempt to all of this. It's really fascinating. He sees himself sort of above it, like he's going to engage in this corruption, these shady dealings, hurting his friend and getting his friend Danny killed, and getting his boss deported, someone who seems to trust him. And Ethan argues that he can always slip back into his morally righteous self, that it's just a momentary thing, and he will not be badly influenced by money. But as we see, that's not really true, because this has sort of been passed down to his children, possibly learning from what they're seeing in their father. And maybe Ethan is realizing that you're always going to be corrupted when you engage in this kind of behavior, and that's what leads him to try to kill himself. Whether or not he actually does remains to be seen, but I think that attempt to kill himself is an admission that I'm wrong, I did some horrible things, and I can't take any of it back. Another aspect of this story, as I mentioned before, is capitalism. Steinbeck realizes that capitalism has kind of won at this point. In the past, he wrote The Grapes of Wrath and Dubious Battle, where socialists or the workers kind of tried to rise up against business interests, but were smacked down. But both of those stories are somewhat optimistic in that they have hope for the future, that maybe these workers will win someday. But I feel like this story kind of negates that, in that that capitalism has kind of it's seeped into the communities, it's made everyone hyper-focused on money, and it's resulted in a ton of corruption as well as other moral failings. We're no longer looking out for our neighbor as Steinbeck had once hoped in the past, which is really sad. It's very unfortunate that Steinbeck seems to have come to this place, but you can argue that he's not wrong, that this is sort of a reflection of where America is now, and he's trying to get the reader to look at that and understand that this is something that can't allowed to be gained, or it can't allowed to be have a foothold in our communities. And unfortunately, it seems like it has at this point. And it's going to take a lot of work to get back to that point of Indubious Battle, or Grapes of Wrath, or Of Mice and Men, or even East of Eden, where it's focused on people rather than these like money hungry community members who only want that money, only want to better themselves rather than other people. Steinbeck is also touching upon other things, including post-war disillusionment. Both Danny and Ethan are World War II veterans. And again, like maybe you had hope that after World War II things would be better, and that, again, we'd be looking out for one another, but that doesn't seem to be the case here, and maybe Ethan wonders what it was all for, why he killed all those people, tried to make the country better, tried to get rid of the evil in the world, but yet it still remains. And it's pretty similar to Catcher in the Rye, because although I don't think that the main character of Catcher in the Rye, whose name Holden Caulfield, he didn't necessarily serve in the war, but I do think that story is a reflection of the failed promise of post-World War II America, and how so many people are lost, disillusioned, and kind of disenfranchised with the entire endeavor, and not a lot can really make things better for these people, and both characters kind of just get lost, fall by the wayside, and here, like, Ethan's trying to kill himself. I do like how Steinbeck is getting at that disillusionment. It's very important to talk about, especially 15 years after World War II for Steinbeck, to see the world become entrenched in the Cold War as well as this American imperialism. It couldn't have been easy to see. There are a couple things that I don't like about this story. Steinbeck switches narrative style in this story. He constantly flips between first and third person, giving us an insight into Ethan's head, but also there are chapters where it focuses outward, like there's an omniscient narrator, which I don't necessarily like here. I feel like the story fluctuates too often, and we're not given a view into who the story is actually about. Because if it's first person, we can trust what is being said about Ethan, but if it's third person, I don't really feel that's the case. It doesn't really give us that much insight. And just that switch feels weird and jarring at times. And then there is some racism and sexism in this story. Obviously, there's a lot of use of Italian slurs here. And then the sexism, which is kind of directed towards Ethan's wife a little bit, but also towards Margie. And I do feel like some of that might be related to the fact that Margie is viewed as a man-eater, and Steinbeck had his issues with one of his wives, and so some of that sexism might be leaking into the story. Some of those hurt feelings that he had. So yeah, just a little bit of problem. It doesn't sink the story, but it's there, and it feels it does feel weird. And then also the story meanders at times. It feels like the first part of the story doesn't really have a focus, and it just kind of goes everywhere, and it's really hard to get into. Feels kind of boring that way. But the second part kind of picks things up. And I feel like it definitely has more of a focus. But the entire thing where this has been a scheme on Ethan's part the whole time, it doesn't really feel like there's a lot of setup to that point. Because the story is meandering, and I feel like Steinbeck could have possibly worked on the first half of the story to really get us to that point and done it a little better there. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Winter of Our Discontent by John Steinbeck. Pretty good book, possibly one of the best that I've read this year. It is Steinbeck, after all. He is a high-quality writer. But I will say it's also not as good as the previous Steinbeck books I read. Certainly not as great as Indubious Battle. battle, and also nowhere near East of Eden, unfortunately. But it is still pretty good. And again, like a Steinbeck story that doesn't reach the heights of East of Eden, that's not so bad, because it's still probably better than most of the stuff I've been reading on and off this channel. So I do recommend this. Possibly go to your local library and check it out, or even buy a copy at your local bookstore. It's certainly worth purchasing, I would say. But if you have anything to say about my review here, let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this author or Winter of Our Discontent if they don't already know. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and small town corruption-based travels. Farewell.